welcome everybody for this session of the European Strategy Dialogue, which is done in cooperation of the Leiden University, the University of Bonn, and Landry Charrier from Sirice, Sorbonne, and the Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung. And we are very happy to have Jeroen Dobber from the Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung office in Brussels being our moderator today. This past year, the international scene has seen many difficult events and developments, and I'm very happy that today we were able to share with you impressions from people who have been working in Poland or were posted in Poland. And I think I'm expressing a feeling which many people would share, that we were very happy to receive happy news from Poland in terms of the elections which were done there recently and the forming of a new government. So we will discuss today what that can mean for Europe, for the European Union, maybe also for our bilateral relations, because we have with us former ambassadors to Warsaw from Germany and from France. And so on that account, I'm very happy that we can do our European strategy dialogue today on new developments in Poland. And with this, I'm very happy to be able to ask Jeroen Dobber, our moderator, to take over, and thank all the participants, the panelists, for being able to join us today on this new event of the ESD series. Thank you very much. Jeroen.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Dirk, and thank you also on my behalf for joining. My name is Jeroen Dobber. As was already mentioned, I work for the Friedrich-Naumann-Foundation. I work at the Brussels office, and I'm responsible for the global security hub of the foundation. And I will moderate today's session. So I will give a very quick introduction on what we're going to talk about, also the speakers, and a bit about the structure of the debate. And after that, we can get started straight away with the questions. So what we will talk about today is the election result and the campaign leading up to that. And now, last week, after Prime Minister Morawiecki lost a vote of confidence, finally Donald Tusk has been installed as the new Prime Minister, bringing an end to the 8-year rule of the Law and Justice Party. So what we want to talk about is how did the coalition, how did Tusk's coalition manage to win that election? What are the main challenges, but also opportunities that the government will have to deal with? And I think that's going to be an important part of our discussion. What changes can we expect at the European level? We will discuss that with the 4 speakers that we have with us today. To begin, Ambassador Rolf Nikel, former Ambassador Rolf Nikel, who's a former German diplomat, served as the Federal Government Commissioner for Disarmament and Arms Control, but very notably for this discussion also as Germany's ambassador to Poland from 2014 to 2020. And he's currently a vice president at the German Council on Foreign Relations, DGAP. Thank you for joining. Also with us this afternoon is Pierre Buhler, also former French diplomat who served as France ambassador to Singapore and Poland from 2012 to 2016. So you've had some overlap. I think you've probably worked together there. After that, he also became the president of the Institut Français. And he currently teaches international affairs at Sciences Po, the Hertie School in Berlin, and the College of Europe. Thank you also for joining. Then we have with us Dr. Renata Mieńkowska-Norkiene, who is an associate professor at the University of Warsaw, where she works on issues related to European integration. And she's also worked on questions of populism and quality of democracy, so very relevant for the discussion that we'll be having today. Thank you too for joining.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have with us Joep van Lith, who is a PhD candidate in empirical political science at the Radboud University in Nijmegen. And he focuses on democratic recession and the defense of democracy against autocratization. So again, very relevant topics for the discussion that we will be having today. Thank you also for joining. Great to have you all with us. I think that we have a very diverse set of perspectives on board, so looking forward to hear your input. Before we start, some very quick housekeeping. I will start with an opening question. After that, we'll have a few follow-up questions, but I hope we can start as soon as possible with the Q&A from the participants. So for all the participants, you are warmly encouraged to join this discussion and to bring up your questions in the chat. There's a chat function on Zoom where you can bring that up, and I will read them out, or I will read out the questions for you. So feel free to start putting in your questions there straight away, and I'll try to get as many of them answered as possible. The end time for the discussion is 1:15, so I'll try to wrap up about 10 minutes past 1, so that we can all have lunch. On that note, let's get started. I'll start with the first discussion, and maybe we can first get a Polish perspective on that. Dr. Mieńkowska, could you walk us through your observations on the election campaign and the results, and how do you think the opposition coalition managed to win?
Okay, thank you very much for this invitation and for this interest, because I think Poland should still be observed despite this great news, actually, of coming back to Europe and to the community of democratic states, mainly due to the fact that, of course, there are still quite many challenges in front of the new government, and they will not be that easy to face and then to be defeated. So thank you once again. And now regarding the question how they actually made it. Well, I'll begin maybe with a kind of a question that is related to the trends, because the trends were quite clear. There were more and more de-democratizing states, and unfortunately it looked like a trend worldwide. However, Poland has shown that this trend wasn't actually fully a trend, or at least that there might still be possibilities of stopping it or a sort of slowing it down. And indeed, I would say that Poland wasn't the first one that gave an evidence of ability of stopping that trend. What Donald Tusk has done, actually, it's, in my opinion, something quite similar to what happened already in the United States and in Brazil. There is a set of former democratic leaders that sort of put a lot of effort and a lot of hard work into coming back to democracy, or into making their states come back to democracy. And Lula da Silva or Joe Biden. Biden was, no one knew actually in politics. He was a very experienced politician. Same story with Lula da Silva, who was actually a former president. And here in Poland also, I think Donald Tusk has strongly contributed to even a chance of the opposition to win the elections. So I would say that the trend, or what we might observe also, and maybe support to some extent if we do want to strengthen democracy and stop autocratization, is maybe support to all those leaders that still have capacities and have experience with how to fight and then maybe at the end of the day defeat the autocrats. So that would be this more sort of macro perspective. Regarding the Polish situation as such, what happened, and what could also be a kind of a lesson for the others, is that there were new democratic entities on the political scene. So we had a new political party. Usually when we, let's say, meet new political entities on political scenes, they are populist. In the Polish case, it was a little bit different. So we had the New Democratic Party that actually connected with one of the oldest and I would say most established political parties, which was the Polish Peasants' Party. So I'm speaking about Poland 2050, that connected with Polish Peasants' Party, and they together established Trzecia Droga, so the third way. And this was, I would say, the alternative for all those who didn't want to follow the populists, but they were searching for something else than Donald Tusk and his heritage. Because Donald Tusk, actually, he brought also the heritage of his former government with him, which was actually quite heavy, I would say, for numerous, in particular, young voters. So this, paradoxically, although, as I said, normally it is so that they take votes from democratic parties, in this case, it was so that the novelty, I might really quite honestly say, novelty also, although it stole voters from the main opposition, democratic opposition party, which is a Civic Coalition, it also raised chances to win. Another reason for winning of the democratic opposition was, in my opinion, the fact that Law and Justice has just made it way too radical, and it tried to polarize the society in a way which stopped being understandable also for their concrete voters. Because, I mean, it was so, the style, it was so low and it was so obvious that people really started thinking that something must be wrong in this strategy, that public TV, you know, approaching or even maybe defeating in some ways North Korean public broadcaster, that is not something that everyone, even those who support Law and Justice, can really stand long on their TV screens. And one thing which is strongly related to that, which wasn't the case in 2015 or not the case in 2019, it was that due to this enormous polarization, youngsters started producing internet content, in particular memes, which were strongly laughing at the government representatives, and they stopped, and also Jarosław Kaczyński started losing its, I would say, good reputation as a strategist, and started being an elderly, I would say, person who does not always follow the trends and the situation. So, you know, it's very easy to laugh at, let's say, someone when they come up with so many reasons for that. And to put all this together, I might say that this caused a huge mobilization of the youngsters and of women. And I would also say that one thing which we hardly mention, but in my opinion, it's incredibly important. It's the fact that in 2020, after the ruling of the Polish Constitutional Tribunal regarding abortion, so putting near total ban on abortion in Poland, it caused a 10 percentage point decrease of support for Law and Justice, which Law and Justice has never actually gained back. Which means that women already back then, made Law and Justice much less powerful. And this trend just required the big turnout. And we had enormous turnout because 74 point something, I forgot, but nearly 75% of a turnout in the Polish conditions. It was something that made simply the concrete electorate of Law and Justice, which is mainly elderly people from the villages, not necessarily less educated. That's not the distinguishing indicator. However, definitely smaller states, smaller towns, villages, and also elderly people. That's something that distinguished the concrete electorate of Law and Justice. But even despite the fact that this was quite big, in such a turnout, it became obviously much smaller than Law and Justice had expected. And this cost most probably also the the winning not necessarily of Donald Tusk and Civic Coalition, because they won on the opposition side, but they couldn't, of course, govern themselves independently. So they need the left, and they also need Szymon Hołownia mainly. So I would point out these reasons for the moment, and maybe ad vocem I'll add something to what other speakers will notice. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. That was a very kind of good comprehensive overview, I think, to start off with a few really interesting insights already. Maybe we could go into that a bit more later on. Next up, I'd like to ask Ambassador Nikel. Could you also give us some of your observations about the elections, about the campaign, and perhaps also how the result was perceived in Germany?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. It's great to be on a panel with such distinguished guests. And I particularly, of course, want to mention my friend and former colleague in Warsaw, Pierre Buhler. Thank you very much for being in that group. I would say that, as already has been pointed out earlier, that this was actually a very important election, probably the most important election in Europe this year. And probably one of the most important elections in Poland since 1989. And Poland's voters proved that it is possible to get rid of populism in elections. Okay, it was demonstrated before that in other countries, like it was said in Brazil, in the US, but it's a different situation within the European Union. So yes, you can get rid of populism in elections. It's a very important message for Europe in general, not only for Poland. And you can win elections even in an unfair campaign, because the campaign was very, very unfair, with Law and Justice beneficiary of the public media and many other things. The finances of government, which was used for things to favor the government. So a scenario of Budapest on the Vistula has been stopped, and that is a great message. However, where there was talk about the trend, I mean, this is a positive trend in Poland, but we've also Slovakia, we've had the Netherlands. And also to a certain extent Italy, even though in Italy the government in terms of foreign policy is actually not behaving as some had feared it would. On the reasons for the electoral victory, one should, of course, first of all mention the polarization and the enormous mobilization that took place, particularly in the big cities. And yes, women and young people made an enormous impact on that, and abortion issue is of course one of the most important ones. But we should not lose sight of the fact that peace, together with Confederacja, stands at 42.5% of the population, and that is a factor which cannot be completely neglected. And let's also face the fact that this new government consists of three groupings, of which there are also individual parties. So at the end, there's something like 10 or 11 parties in that government. Now, we already have a problem in Germany with 3 parties. I can imagine how difficult it will be for Poland to keep that group together. Secondly, we are entering a so-called cohabitation period with a president who has shown that he is still using his powers to do things like extending the period of transition and possibly using his veto, and the government doesn't have the votes to override a veto in case the president uses it. And thirdly, of course, there is the problem of the courts, which are still packed with peace loyalists, specifically the Constitutional Court, and it will be very difficult to draw back the judicial reform without resorting to not rule of law means. So that will be a very, very difficult situation. Obviously, Germany, we were very, very happy about what happened, but we also aware of the fact that, first of all, domestically the situation is not easy. The new government will have to concentrate heavily on domestic affairs before going into other areas. Of course, some of the domestic areas are linked to Europe, specifically when it comes to the funds. But that government will very much have to concentrate in the first round, should I say, on these events, on domestic events, specifically also in case, specifically also in light of the fact that there will be elections, local elections in April and European elections in June, and then of course in May 2025 the presidential elections. So yes, we are. I think most of Germans are very happy about what happened, but we should be quite guarded about what's going to happen, and there won't be a complete change in Polish foreign policy after what had happened. Specifically, when we talk about institutional arrangements in connection with enlargement or migration issues, for example. So, in all this lot of good wine, I want to add a little bit of cold water.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, thanks for the kind of the realistic cold water. But I think that's also very important for our discussion, and maybe we can go into that as well a bit later on when we talk more also about the challenges that will be coming up for the new government. Before we do so, I would still like to turn to Ambassador Buhler to ask if you could give us a bit of an insight also on your observations and the way that the election result has been seen from a French point of view.
Yes, thank you for having me. And well, happy to see Ambassador Nikel, my former colleague in Warsaw. Well, to explain, a lot already has been said indeed, but what I would like to add or to insist on is that I see three factors to explain what happened. It's firstly, the civil society is extremely vibrant in Poland. Poland I spent 2 terms first as a young diplomat in Poland under martial law, under Jaruzelski, and then later as an ambassador. And I could observe how this nation is rebellious to being deprived from its freedom, be it by a foreign power or national power. And I think this is in stark contrast with Hungary. Mentioned the Budapest and on the Vistula, or the slogan was by peace was soon will, when they were campaigning when we were there, Rolf, in Warsaw, to say, oh, soon we'll have Budapest in Warsaw. It didn't work that way. They had it for 8 years, but Warsaw is not Budapest. And so I would emphasize that this contrast with Hungary, where civil society is under, I would say, has been put under sedation by Viktor Orban. And I think this mobilization of this civil society prompted the high turnout Renata emphasized. Second point, and also Renata has said it already, but the Tusk is a real political animal. He has shown up as a leader. He was able to unite this opposition and to put together a spectrum that spans from extreme left to conservative right, with extremely different worldviews, and to unite them under one banner, and but under one banner, but different at least three coalitions in which, given what Renata just mentioned, this sort of cold feelings from some quarters in Poland vis-à-vis Tusk, everyone actually who was against peace could find a party to vote for. And what Tusk also managed to do is to convene those huge demonstrations in June and then in October, which were a catalyst for this the turnout. And there's even one thing I would like to share with you, which has been I was told when I was in Warsaw early November, that the word was given out that because you remember the third way, actually they were on the fringe in polls, and the fringe of 8% plus minus, and if they had fallen under 8%, they would have been out of the parliament. And of course, this would have been a boon for peace. And what was done, there was a whole campaign with portals saying if you can in Poland you can vote if you can vote in another, not your place of living, and so the people could just register for that election in another constituency where third way was could have been or needed help, needed support. And this is how while polls were rating third way at 8%, it ended up with 14.5%, because that shows that Poland's the Polish opposition can use tricks as well, legal ones. Third thing, I think third factor is church. Church has been crippled by scandals, by its tough stance on abortion rights, and at the time when Poland is massively in favor of public opinion, at least in favor of a liberalization of abortion rights, and this well, the church was an electoral agent for peace, and despite this, it was not enough. And what we see is church going in a free fall. And when you look at the polls, opinion polls, there's a process of secularization, which is quite strong actually, and well, takes as is the case in other European countries, people away from church and from peace as well. All the more that the electorate of peace is much more, it's much older than the other ones. How it was received in France, of course, with a sigh of relief. We had, our relations were not as bad as with peace as once. Well, the ordeal peace imposed upon Germany and your successors, Rolf, but there was a pretty icy relationship, a cold relationship. Although Macron tried to restore it, it didn't work. And now we see, of course, a return of the new government to Europe, which is reassuring in many respects, but maybe we can get to that later.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And we'll definitely get to that. I think later on in the discussion, we can talk a bit more about that, like what that means for Europe. Thanks. Then I would like to turn to Joep van Lith. I'm aware that I put you in a difficult position to comment or to say anything sensible after all these very distinguished contributions already. But maybe you can also give us like a short insight into your observations, also the Dutch reception, but also maybe more on your research. I don't know if you've researched this in particular, but to get a bit of an idea of how far the democratic recession in Poland had gone, like what is the damage that has to be repaired now? Maybe you can give a bit of an insight into that as well.
Yes, hi all. Again, thanks for inviting me. I think it's great to have both policy and practitioners from the political and the diplomatic spheres, as well as researchers, to talk about this together and to try and figure out what is going on. So in the Netherlands, it's first of the elections were basically hailed as a victory for democracy, as pro-democratic standards. And I think to that extent, it's very important that there was such a high turnout. The 75%, it shows that citizens care, and that is to a large extent what democracy needs. It needs people who care about democracy and who care to have their say and have their vote in it. I think we should be a little bit careful in that optimism, though, because especially as some of you already said before, and as you also asked, there is a lot of what I would maybe call entrenched autocratization already. The captured judiciary, the Constitutional Court has already been mentioned, but also the way that the electoral system functions with such a high electoral threshold. If the vote would have turned out differently, just slightly in different districts, it would have been a completely different outcome in Parliament, maybe changing the potential coalitions that could have been. So this entrenched autocratization is there since the last 8 years of the Law and Justice Party, not only in the courts, not only in the electoral system, but also when it comes to media, oversight bodies, and those kind of organizations. And that might be one of the big challenges facing the current coalition and Tusk now, how to overcome that entrenched autocratization without themselves becoming an autocrat as well. They need to commit to democratic rules, norms, laws, and regulations, but using those rules and legislations, trying to figure out how to counter the autocratization that is already going on. And I think from that perspective, Tusk, while a great politician and a political animal, I think some of you already called them, also has a personal challenge ahead of him as well, because he has been accused often as a foreign agent, as a German agent, as someone from the EU trying to influence EU policies in Poland. And this is what we see in all autocratizing countries, that the pro-democracy actors are being accused of being a foreign agent, having an ulterior agenda, maybe pro-democratic, but also anti-nationalist, anti-Poland, anti-Brazil, anti-USA, anti-the Netherlands. And to a certain extent, this is sort of true for Tusk. He has been in Europe for such a long time. He's been a very influential actor there. And he has this European legacy that he needs to bring back home to Poland and sort of try to reframe in a way that actually becomes also pro-democracy and pro-Poland. So I think that would be one of the main challenges coming up. How can Tusk and his coalition be pro-democratic while countering the autocratization and while countering the idea that he maybe is like a foreign agent, international interventionist?
Thank you so much for that. I think that's also good to have a good understanding of what Poland is up against, basically like the state of play at the moment. Maybe we can before we get to the European discussion, we can quickly talk a bit more about these challenges that are coming up. And I wanted to ask a follow-up question, or a question related to something that Ambassador Nikel brought up already about the stability of the coalition. Dr. Mieńkowska, could you comment a bit on that as well? What do you expect there? How stable will that be? How diverse are the actors or are the parties in that coalition? And is that something we can really expect for the next few years to stay in power?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a very good question. I assume that it will be quite stable despite all those differences. We have a specific situation in Poland now, namely, we already have expressions of our Speaker of the Parliament, Szymon Hołownia, whose party is like the most, I would say, conservative in the coalition of those democratic entities. And he is the one who makes, indeed, comments on what government does in the area of, let's say, abortion or relations of the church with the state. And for example, quite recently, like it was from yesterday, I think, his comment on idea of a limitation of the number of hours of religion at schools. So Barbara Nowacka, our new Minister of Education, she will limit this number to 1 hour per week. And there started, of course, sounding also voices from Law and Justice who state that it's the priests the bishops who should make decisions, while Szymon Hołownia stated that it should actually be the society that should decide, not the bishop, however, nor the minister. So there will be tensions, that's for sure, in particular over the question of relation of the state and the church, as well as regarding questions of abortion and most probably also legalization of partnership of LGBTQ plus representatives and informally, let's say, living together people. So here we may have tensions, but I don't think, and here I take responsibility for what I say, I don't think Donald Tusk will risk at any point dismantling the coalition. So I think he will find the way to avoid those tensions, even if it will mean risking, let's say, not fulfilling certain promises. So I think the coalition will be there as long as needed for Donald Tusk and other leaders. Why am I speaking about as long as needed and not for the whole 4 years? Because first of all, we have elections to self-governments this spring, forthcoming spring, and we also have, as we all know, elections to the European Parliament, and a lot is dependent on the result of both of them. I expect actually winning the democratic parties, and that would be good news for strengthening, let's say, the trend that we have just witnessed. And it is possible, it's doable, because the mobilization among the youngsters, among women, and basically among the society can be quite large. Plus, Law and Justice has just provided us with certain, let's say, evidences of their unwillingness of, let's say, mildering the discourse. So they will still polarize, which means that they will discourage more centrally oriented potential voters. So they will discourage their, I would call them cynical voters, not the ideological ones. And they have a potential for something like 25% of the ideological ones, or those like faithful ones, while the rest is usually those in the last elections. These were those who were skeptical about whether Donald Tusk will maintain the social allowances and all those, let's say, social spendings that the Poles have already sort of got used to. So I think that they now will see, okay, nothing wrong happened. Donald Tusk will try to clean up the mess. There will be a lot of money coming from the European Union. And I think the responsibility of the EU for, let's say, not creating too many obstacles here is also quite large, but I don't think any larger problems will happen here, because even though there is a veto of the president, and indeed here I totally agree with Ambassador Nikel that cohabitation will be tough, that there will still be a kind of possibility of avoiding, let's say, the potential veto. We can already see that our Minister of Justice uses regulations, ministerial regulations or ministers' regulations to overcome necessity of launching the process of adopting the law, or of even some other kinds of documents that might require president's signature or might enable president's, let's say, step by sending them to the Constitutional Court. So there are means, and they are broadly accepted by the lawyers, by the way, and experts, that may sort of make us closer to fulfilling those milestones which are necessary for the money. And you know, the money will go to self-governments. And the sooner they go there, the larger the chances to win also the municipality elections and the municipal elections. And elections to the European Parliament are a little bit different because they base to a large extent on ideological aspects, plus Well, yeah, they will be really right after the self-governmental election. So it's difficult to say what kind of narrative will be existent then. But what we can already see is that Law and Justice will go the usual path of polarizing. And this might not be something that the polls now expect. Plus, Donald Tusk has maintained and hasn't suppressed any spendings, or any allowances and so on, which the people appreciate. And this will not change until the elections are there. And then probably also there might appear some problems with the president. So I assume that the governing coalition, even despite the differences, will come up with the ideas of a sort of pretending. I know it sounds like a little bit cynical, but still. They will pretend it's not them, it's the president who vetoes the stuff, or that they are afraid of the presidential veto, therefore they do not come up with certain, let's say, initiatives, which can still be standable for them and for their voters. The problem will appear after the elections, the presidential elections, but then again, lots of things may happen, because Szymon Hołownia is one of the serious candidates in those presidential elections. If Donald Tusk devotes Rafał Trzaskowski and doesn't support him, but there is a kind of, or at least accepts Szymon Hołownia as a potential candidate, then I suppose Szymon Hołownia will pay back by not causing troubles, also in fulfilling the promises that Donald Tusk will necessarily have to fulfill anyway, in order to get re-elected, if he even plans to, but I suppose he plans to. So this is a bit a tricky situation, and this, I would say, constellation of elections and how this new coalition is built, it is a bit tricky. But honestly, with the war in Ukraine, with necessity to, I don't know, contribute to the European, let's say, ideas of what to do in the future, plus elections in the US, which can set up an enormous challenge if not a Democrat becomes the next president, it can be very tricky. The last word, which I see is actually quite positive, very paradoxically, in what has been going on recently on the European agenda, is that the European leaders, they become really, really fed up with Orban. And I think that it's just a matter of time that they will start searching for possibilities of really showing him that this cannot go this direction. I'm not sure to what extent they will be determined and if there are no external factors. But Poland and what happened in Poland can also be a kind of a catalyzer for let's say, maybe pushing forward some measures which will prevent from destructive role of Hungary and maybe also Slovakia. We will see. We see some signs of Slovak problems, but still it's still Viktor Orban that is the toughest. And Giorgia Meloni, look, she doesn't actually cause as serious troubles in this European spectrum of whatever kind of challenges, because we have like zillions of them, but it's basically Orban. So I think that Donald Tusk can also play a certain role, and also his legitimacy. And in this regard, of course, the coalition will not show that there is a kind of lack of unity or whatever. I think Donald Tusk will be able, and he's experienced enough to devote things which he may devote in order to maintain this unity and to really keep it until the first elections and then until the presidential elections. And then what happens next, we'll see. It's dependent on who wins the presidential elections, in my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That shows also, I think, the complexity, that it's not like a done deal or something, that we're automatically on a kind of upward trajectory. There's a lot of work still to be done on that front. Thank you. In the meantime, we have several questions that came in already in the Q&A function, and also an encouragement from my side to keep asking your questions. I'll try to, as I said before, I'll try to bring up as many as possible. You already just mentioned about also the European role, and I think that's a nice bridge maybe to start that discussion, to talk a bit more about the European role that Poland will play now, or the change in that role. And that's also one of the questions. So this is a question from one of the participants. As students of Poland's next chapter in the next chapter of relations with the EU, what role do you think Poland will have in the next few years? An attitude of restoring relations, or an attitude of an increasingly powerful actor, or something else? So what role can we expect Poland to play? Ambassador Buhler, can I ask you from your point of view, if you could, I mean, I know that you cannot predict the future, but what can we expect, you think, from the new Tusk government in the next few years?
Yes,
at the European level.
Thank you for the question. I think, well, firstly, we'll have what we witness as of now is a commitment, a strong commitment to the mainstream of EU preferences on several issues. Of course, first of all, there's the rule of law, return to the rule of law, and however difficult it might be, but certainly the commitment is very strong. And there's a commitment also to enlargement. Of course, this was the case as well for peace previously, but well, we have a government which will strongly support that stream, and the same is true for Ukraine, support for Ukraine in its the war Russia is waging against it. But there are several issues, contentious issues with EU mainstream, although this mainstream might change in the upcoming years, as we see from some, well, in some countries and more countries. First contentious issue is asylum and migration pact and the issue of relocation of immigrants. You may remember, Rolf, when we were there in 2015, the Tusk's government, it was not Tusk anymore, it was in Brussels already, but the PO government had accepted the relocation scheme proposed by the Commission, and this was really a boon for peace in its campaign then in the fall of 2015. So I think PO has been burned by that, and they will be very cautious on anything looking like relocation. Then there's the impact of the war against Ukraine on the functioning of the single market. We have witnessed embargoes on export to Poland of cereals and other food products. We nowadays, still now, is a blockade of the borders, Ukraine-Poland border is going on against this. Truckers are protesting against the free roaming rights for Ukrainian truckers throughout Europe. They're strongly against it, and well, Tusk promised to solve it, but well, this has still to be seen. And also, as a contentious issue is governance of an enlarged EU in the future. How, and this question is already on the table, seeing how difficult it is to govern a union with 26, 27 members, 26, and how it will look like with 35 EU members. So the question of qualified majority voting is on the table, the veto rights, which that unanimity on foreign policy and tax issues is given to one country. We have witnessed it during the last summit in Brussels in the hands of Viktor Orban. Last point, I think Tusk's experience in Brussels, his network, and his expertise in that field is, I think, can help Poland to become a major player, I would say a trendsetter in European policy. Of course, Poland is on the eastern flank of the European Union, and well, it can certainly be considered. Maybe we talk about that later, talking about security, but as a bulwark, the strongest state on that eastern flank against the Russian threat. But I think it is hard to imagine Poland as a fully fledged player until there is a realistic possibility of Poland accessing to the Eurozone. I believe this is not, of course, it was not in the program signed by the three parties, because it's certainly a contentious issue, and there's possibly no agreement, although when I was in Warsaw in early November, all three representatives of the three parties, of the three members of the coalition were telling, but it's not, it was a bit off the record, that the coalition would strive towards Poland joining the Eurozone, with one caveat, which is that the constitution needs to be changed. The euro is not part of the constitution. The constitution says the zloty is the national currency, and this would have to be changed. And to change constitution, you need 60% or 3/3. I don't know. Maybe Renata will correct me, but certainly a majority the coalition does not have. So, well, it's certainly a good omen there, but always with a grain of salt.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, and that I think that might be interesting to talk about a bit more later on. This idea also as Poland as a trendsetter and the potential of that. Before that, maybe I can turn to Ambassador Nikel to ask about your thoughts about that changing role of Poland at the European level, and perhaps also about the development now in the bilateral relations between Germany and Poland. It was already mentioned before that there's been quite a kind of difficult period in those bilateral relations now. How will that change with the new government coming in?
Thank you very much for that question. I very much share Pierre's views on the more central role that Poland will play in the European Union. And I would say from our side, that's a good thing. Because Poland has become more important from many points of view. It's developing well economically. It's having a much more important situation when it comes to security because of the war in Ukraine. So we welcome, and when I say we, I mean German government, I would say, would welcome such a positioning. It would also mean that we would work together on a number of issues, and there's a lot of talk about rejuvenating the Weimar Triangle, for example, with respect to with France, and sort of help create or help to forward the agenda that we've given us in the European Union. But there's another problem here, because every Polish government has had some sort of idea about re-equilibrating the relations within the European Union. Poland, in this respect, is a non-status quo country. It wants to change that equilibrium, or not equilibrium, disequilibrium, if you want. It's a question about how do you manage structural asymmetry in the European Union. Now, there have been a number of things done in the past under the former Tusk government. It was Radek Sikorski's big speech in Berlin, where he asked for German leadership. He actually reiterated this call in 2022 when he gave another speech at the DGAP. Now, the peace version was completely different. They wanted to block German leadership by creating all kinds of mechanisms, such as using Visegrad force, such as really investing a lot into the so-called 3 Cs initiative. These mechanisms do not function, well, they function, but they do not function in a way that they actually help to overcome this asymmetry as it is perceived. So the question is, how does the new government proceed to that? I don't think there will be a big there will be a lot of change of climate. There will be a lot of change of style and outlook. But when it comes to the bread and butter issues, for example, with Germany, specifically historical issues, I don't expect the new government to change a lot, because it can't afford to be treated again as a traitor because it doesn't pursue the compensation agenda. And therefore, I think there will be, and there will also be, of course, a discussion, the security discussion about how to help best Ukraine, how to strengthen the eastern flank, etc. So there will be a number of these points and a number of these questions that have to be debated. And the important part, in my view, is that we create somehow a common united front within the European Union. Peace for the commerce, if you wish, was somehow dividing Europe. And now there's a real chance of working together, all of us, including the French, German, and all the others, for a common united front on many issues. And we need to take that opportunity, because that opportunity may not last forever. And that would be my pitch on this one. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And a nice call to action. I think that's always good. There's another question that came in that I would like to bring up with Joep van Lith. It says, you mentioned Tusk could be seen as a foreign agent. What does this mean for his ability to rebuild the institutions? Are the institutions that he should defend or rebuild meant by his supporters or not? And so how difficult is that going to make his task in your opinion?
Yeah, great question. So I think I need to emphasize that I do not necessarily claim that Tusk is a foreign agent. I don't want to make a claim about this at all. But I think it's important to realize that it is rather easy to frame him as such, to make the argument as an opposer of Tusk that he might be a foreign agent, that he might have allegiances outside of the government and outside of the coalition and outside of Poland. So when we talk about democracy and his commitment to democracy, it is also easier to question whether he is credible in his commitment to democracy, whether when he says he wants to prevent democracy, when he says in the run-up to the election with the March for a Million Hearts, he called about democracy then, but maybe this is just a political ploy to get into power and then do whatever he wants. And this is not something that I can necessarily predict for the future what will happen, but it is something that probably his oppositions are thinking about, how to frame Tusk as yet another foreign agent. And I think it's important here to bring up that at the very end of the previous Civic Platform coalition in 2015, they committed what Sadursky, a legal scholar, called the first constitutional crime. So they tried, sort of outside of the Constitution, to appoint new judges to the Constitutional Court. And then this hugely backfired, because after Law and Justice was elected, they used the same logic to appoint their own judges. And so Tusk sort of set a standard, sort of set a precedent that then could be followed later on to slowly and further autocratize. And this, his first constitutional crime, combined with maybe his being a foreign agent, makes it really hard to come over as a credible defender of democracy or at least makes it really easy for the Law and Justice Party to frame him as not genuinely committed to democracy. And this is why I think it is sort of, it should be taken with a lot of care to try and come up with ways, with procedures that circumvent the normal parliamentary and democratic rules. And Dr. Mieńkowska said just a little bit before that there are seemingly accepted rules to have like a ministerial regulation, which doesn't necessarily need presidential approval. But if you go this route, sure, that's perfect, because you don't run the risk of having the veto by President Duda. But at the same time, you can again be framed as being anti-democratic because you're not going through parliamentary procedures, you're not going through the president, and still there is 40% of the polls voting on law and justice. Duda has a 50% mandate. So just by going the route of not acknowledging this group of people is might backfire in the end, even though for now you can save democracy, you can defend democracy. Next elections coming up, I have no glass ball, I can't predict what's going to happen, but this is an argument that's going to be made that, again, Civic Platform has actually undermined democracy by going a different route than actually strengthening it. So this would be challenges for me that Tusk could face, even if he has now the democratic mandate to build Poland into a stronger democracy again.
Thanks so much for that. And I kind of wanted to pose a similar question to Dr. Mieńkowska, but then about the ability to play a role in European discussions for Donald Tusk. This framing of him as a foreign agent, I mean, we don't have to go too much into that because indeed it's kind of like he could be presented as such. But maybe also in terms of the electorate, how pro-European is the electorate? Should we really see this as a kind of like a pro-European vote, or is it more an anti-law and justice vote? And to what extent will that influence Donald Tusk's ability to play a stronger pro-European role?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I'll try to be really short. So first of all, I wouldn't be so sure if we have now to do with the same Donald Tusk as we got used to when he was a president of the European Council. I think I have to disappoint you to some extent regarding relations with France and Germany. There will be much stronger relations, in my opinion, for sure. However, I think that the Russian threat and the situation we have been facing recently, it could have changed also certain aspects of the paradigm of Donald Tusk, and also, I would say, his perception of what may bring actually more to the Polish, in particular, security. So he took Radosław Sikorski rather to clean up the mess in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There will be a much stronger relation with France and Germany for sure. And I would say that this Weimar triangle will definitely be a format which will be much more lively than ever before. But I don't think this will be the general message he wants to send. I think that he will rather try to focus this time, unlike it was the last time when he was a prime minister, on Scandinavian and the Baltic states together, or maybe in a kind of a form of a maybe some states over the Baltic Sea and maybe the North Sea. I don't know, but there will be something like a format of states which clearly see the Russian threat. There will be no coming back to Visegrad and so on, because this is something too strongly related to law and justice. However, as I said, I wouldn't expect too strong relations with France and with Germany. And it's not because he was accused of being a foreign agent and so on and so forth. And not only because he was so strongly connected to Germany, because I'm not sure if everyone here is aware of the fact that he really was accused of being a German secret agent, and that his grandfather was in Wehrmacht and whatever. And even after Donald Tusk has become a prime minister, Jarosław Kaczyński appeared in the Sejm. He just climbed up to say that he would like to underline that Donald Tusk is a German agent and that he's a traitor. So that basically means that he might even believe that. But the point is that that Donald Tusk understands also the situation, and it's not so that the Poles do believe it. Absolutely not. However, any sign of Donald Tusk acting clearly in favor of Germany, if there is no serious reasoning behind it, and if there is no really a security matter included, a strong security matter, can be suspicious. So he will always think twice before he goes with Germany the same direction, which can be risky or tricky. So that's one thing. And to make it short, I'm not sure if this will be an official paradigm, of being more and more oriented towards Scandinavia, but for sure for the Polish security, and in particular when the US wins when in the US the elections are won by a Republican. By the way, I don't get why they don't find anyone among Democrats who might replace Joe Biden. I mean, this is the biggest democracy in the world, and they cannot really find candidates which are more suitable than Biden or Trump in particular. But that's a different story. So I think that that there might be a kind of a shift in this regard. However, relations with Germany will be strong, definitely, because also the Baltic states or the Scandinavian states want Poland that has very good relations with France and with Germany. That's absolutely, there is no doubt about that. However, and we have strong, really statistical data on that, because some institutes in Poland and think tanks that they conducted really good research on that. So the Poles, they need cooperation with Germany, but also the Balts need Poland cooperating with Germany and so on. So it all sort of is okay. Another story are challenges that we all have been facing and we will have to face in the future, which is, of course, enlargement. Enlargement will not be totally unpainful. Plus, of course, the war as such. Olaf Scholz has just said that we would have to be ready for the war until the end of this decade. It's 2023 still. I mean, this is a clear sign of something, let's say, very pessimistic going on there. Then, so the whole support for Ukraine and what happens after the elections in the US. Then generally building this European autonomy in the area of, let's say, not only defense and security, this is undoubtful, but also some foreign policy, because now, European External Action Service does not necessarily fulfill its let's say, expectations. And we have China that is a threat to some extent. We have Russia, we have all those autocracies which are large, like Argentina. It will collapse sooner or later. I don't know what still awaits us, but it's a lot and it's heavy. And energy transformation, we have France and Germany that have a very different approach towards that, but we will have to have the European approach towards also atomic energy, because in Poland we have a plan of building atomic power plants. And the question is what we do actually, whether we go on with those projects or we stop, whether Donald Tusk will cooperate with the US only or with also European partners. We actually don't really know that. Plus there are, of course, businessmen that still stick to law and justice and they still want to go on with their projects and so on. So Donald Tusk will have to also deal with them. And I wouldn't say it's an easy thing. Plus, I mentioned Orban, some of my interlocutors also mentioned him. If we want to defeat him somehow, I mean, if he is not the fifth column of Putin in Europe, we will also have to do something with the treaties, with the unanimity, with, because it's blackmailing. He's blackmailing us all the time, and this will not stop because his situation is worse and worse. Plus, Putin will not always sell just cheap oil, to Orban. It will end sooner or later. So he will have to choose, and we will see what may happen here. So to make the long story short, I think challenges are tougher than we might even expect, but still Donald Tusk will be more than aware of necessity of cooperating both with Germany and with France. However, his strong paradigm and orientation can now shift a little bit more towards Scandinavia and the Baltic states. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think that's also maybe a good kind of last message to wrap up the discussion with. It's 13 past. I'm afraid we have to wrap up soon. We run out of time. I think we could have kept discussing this topic for much longer, so maybe we should think about that on a future occasion. But for now, I think what I take away from it is that the election result was great news, but that the real work is just getting started. That it's really a lot of work to be done still. And that the role of Poland is also really developing. Well, domestically, there's all development, but also at the European level. So it will be interesting to keep following that in the future, and perhaps we can organize another debate like this later on to see where things stand. I would like to thank all the participants for joining us today and for the questions that they asked. I would also like to thank the partners who were involved in bringing this together. So that's the Cassis Institute at the University of Bonn, the Institute of Security and Global Affairs at the University of Leiden, and the Sirice Institute at the Sorbonne, and the Friedrich-Naumann-Foundation, where I work myself. But last but not least, I would like to thank the brilliant speakers that we had with us today. I think there was really a wealth of knowledge that you brought to the discussion, and I think it gave a great insight into what happened, but also what we can expect. So thank you very much for that.